podcast. Hell yeah, brother. Overload, brother.
Beats by @Smoke M2D6.
Welcome to a special episode of Seattle Overload. They're all special because obviously the Seahawks are very special and they don't have a quarterback. And this is the episode, the first episode, because realistically, with the importance of quarterbacks, we will be talking about them a lot. But this is the first episode looking at the Seahawks quarterback options, both on the roster, off the roster, in the draft, and also potentially in free agency or via trade. I am joined by Griffin and also Ty, who I did a terrible job of introducing. Ty's our producer, but as Griffin and I get quite nerdy and X's and O's based, Ty is a conduit, a good translator occasionally of keeping us back on schedule and not being massive geeks, or sort of toning that down slightly. Massive geek number 2, Griffin, how are you?
I'm doing okay. We don't normally do podcasts when it's daylight out, which means that I can do one while caffeinated. So that's cool. Normally
I'm
we're doing
awake.
You're always accommodating me and doing it at like 2 a.m. in the morning, and I'm doing it like at 6 o'clock. But now it's on my end, it's 2:24 p.m. So I'm caffeinating on a Saturday afternoon. So I don't know, maybe I'll be more animated than normal. We'll see. It is a little twisted though, isn't it, that we're doing a podcast completely devoted to the quarterback position? That's not right. I don't think that settles in either of our souls very well, but it must be done. Seattle doesn't have a franchise quarterback at the moment, let alone a starting quarterback that you feel confident about. So yeah, we're gonna talk it through. What did the Seahawks do, Matty? Where do we go from here?
Well, we had this interesting press conference, didn't we? Where, we got a bit of PR into Drew Lock acquired in the trade with Russell Wilson. We kind of touched on him in the previous episode where, we discussed Lock not being it. And I think I tweeted out, Lock ain't it, which he ain't it and he hasn't been it. And he has some intriguing elements to his game. We should not be remiss. And for Seattle to pump him up like that, I mean, they're hardly going to take a dump on their best quarterback available on the roster, right? So let's all chill out here. It's just coaching. Let's relax. But Locke, in college, he had this big arm. He was very inconsistent. He kind of reminds you almost of some of the quarterbacks in this draft class in that he's quite unfinished. There's stuff to work with. You obviously have to get hands-on with him in the sense that you have to see what his personality is like off the field. But he had tools which should have translated to the NFL. But the problem is you suddenly force that guy into being a starter when they're not ready to be, and they haven't developed, and it's just too soon, and there's too much pressure on their shoulders. And then problems start to occur. And as we saw in Denver, he kind of just melted down, and Schneider described it as being beat down. Do you agree with my Lock assessment, or are you a big believer suddenly?
Yeah, I don't think Pete thinks that highly of Lock. Now, I do believe that there is a hypothetical in Pete's mind where he would be comfortable with starting Drew Lock. After all, I mean, he played with a pretty busted up Matt Hasselbeck for a year, Tavares Jackson. They signed Matt Flynn. That was no sure thing. Even starting Russ, it was like you're finding out what he is. There maybe wasn't overwhelming confidence. So there's definitely, I could fathom Pete in a hypothetical, like rolling with Drew Lock. But I don't think that that's what they know what they had with Wilson. They know that efficiency is a premium in the NFL. I'm just demonstrated by paying him a bunch of money. Like they know that's not easily replaceable. Does Pete think that you can have an okay offense to complement a really good defense with worse efficiency than that? Probably. But I don't think that he thinks Locke is the guy. Locke certainly, like you said, has traits, likable traits. That doesn't make you a good quarterback. The fact that Seattle is linked to other, like, supposedly and that can mean anything, inquiring, right? Because that's what they claim to be in on everything. That the fact that they're linked to right away Matt Ryan, Baker Mayfield as possible trade candidates. Earlier, there was a report from a fairly reputable person. I don't remember who it was. I won't say fairly reputable. They are reputable. That Pete, and it was communicated this way, that Pete supposedly really likes Kirk Cousins, and they might look into that. Obviously, that's not an option, even if that was true, because they extended Kirk in Minnesota, I think. But point being is that I think those reports indicate that Pete views Drew Lock as a backup. And even if he has the rosiest optimistic view, I think he's going to be trying to upgrade on that. So, yeah, I think it was just Pete just saying, like, hey, anything can happen with Drew Lock. I mean, I understand the idea of like resisting that Pete was actually being sincere, or resisting that Pete wasn't being insincere because of like to the extent that he was talking about him. But at the same time, he's also said that about other players at other positions where he really thinks like, no, there's really a shot where they could make something happen.
Well, and he
They
said
don't
it.
even see the field.
Hey,
So,
we've had a recent example at the same position with Geno Smith last year, and I mean, heck, Geno Smith. Let's get to him in a second. He might well be the starter, and he did show some promising things. But the way Pete was speaking about him last year was kind of ridiculous, and like that's who he is as a coach. Is to encourage, to motivate. There is zero that Pete Carroll gets out of being, unenthusiastic about the prospect of Lock. Although I do agree with what you've just said, as I knock a wire which hasn't unplugged, so that's great. I do agree with what you've just said in that I feel, if anything, Pete's less into this, but if anything, this is more of a Schneider move in that, when I was at the Senior Bowl in 2019, being a big boy reporter, and I was scanning the field, the practice field, and John Schneider's staring at the quarterbacks, and he does seem to have a particular interest in quarterbacks, as Russell Wilson found out with the Josh Allen Pro Day visit, and that's been covered a lot recently. But he was staring at the quarterback group, which did feature Drew Lock, and he's obviously done his work on him. He said in the press conference how a couple of his buddies were trying to trade for Lock last offseason, sort of thing. And so, it makes sense that they needed to get a quarterback back. When we theorized if Wilson was going to get traded or not, we always said we'd like back, well, I can't even remember the options, but we wanted a bit more back in return than Drew Lock as a quarterback. And then I think the big thing out of that was, and why probably I can't remember the options, is most of the teams around the league, there wasn't really a clear fit in terms of getting something back, which was, I mean, we were trying to do Justin Fields, weren't we? Which obviously doesn't really make sense.
Well, there was the 4 teams, right, that Mark Rodgers leaked to Schefter.
Oh, well, yeah, that thing as well, yeah.
And so, that's kind of what we were working off of even this off season, or going into this off season, because we didn't really know that, maybe Washington's on the table, maybe Denver's on the table. You're kind of just going off of that list, and it's like, all right, well, there's obviously, interest in the Saints from him. There's obviously interest in the Bears. There's interest in the Cowboys. The Cowboys thing isn't going to work. They're not going to trade Dak for Russ. And are the Bears going to trade Justin Fields after giving up all those picks to go up and take him? Like, no. So, and then there's Derek Carr with the Raiders, right? Like, that was the only one that kind of seemed maybe viable.
Yeah.
But even that's really difficult.
Yeah.
And so the thing which is worth mentioning with Locke, right, is, he was a second round pick, a high one at that, I think 42, maybe 41. But he was a second round pick, and it's kind of that Seahawks mentality, which is going to be tested this draft cycle. And we will talk about that, as I said. But, are they willing to wait it out for a guy who's toolsy and they feel good about as a character, and they can develop and wait a bit, even if they don't have this clear starting quarterback yet, like Denver did? Because in the first round, obviously Denver took Noah Fant, who Seattle wanted. Like Schneider said, how they had his name written down before. I think they found a trade down partner, I think was the implication, at pick 21. And they were, that close to taking him, decided to wait it out. And that's when we got that image of them all sat there, him and Carroll sat there looking absolutely distraught after they took LJ Collier, which at the time we were like, what the heck. We
Yeah.
thought they wanted, I think Jerry Tillery was an option as well, but they were sat at 29, and they said the board panned out exactly how we'd have taken it, which is never a good thing because all the players we wanted had gone, and they couldn't trade down again from 29, and it was LJ Collier time, which was, and is still, you can say, a big reach.
You know who are some solid players around the league right now? Draymond Jones and Charles Omenihu.
Very
Draymond Jones went in the third
yeah.
round, Omenihu in the fifth.
Yes.
Just ironic, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's nice that we get to talk about defense very briefly. Yeah, well, I very much liked Omenihu, but
you go ahead. Yeah,
but bringing him to Seattle, it's that comfort blanket for Locke. Locke has actually, at the times he's looked his best, he's often been throwing to Nerf Fant, and that has partly been Fant being a dynamic receiving threat after the catch, but also, Locke likes him. So, I mean, but Geno, it sounded like in the press conference, even though he's not been signed yet, that the other two of the four in the competition would be, and Carroll's not going to tell you that it's four, so he described it as a three-man competition, but they've got to add another quarterback at some point for the Locke reasons. The other two, it sounds like, would be Jake Eason, as Carroll called him, also known as Jacob, and then Geno Smith. So Geno Smith, I guess, is the next guy to talk about. And
just real quick, like we mentioned, like Pete is willing to find out what Old Man Hasselbeck has. He's willing to find out what Tavares Jackson has, what Matt Flynn has, but also the fact that they only lasted one season demonstrates that he also doesn't view that caliber of quarterback as good enough either. So he may, in a hypothetical, may very well.
Well, and as Pete said, right, we're not rebuilding. This ain't a rebuild.
So
like we're right
with
at
the
it.
Fact where they are at right now, Pete knows he's not going to coach forever, even if he is only truly thinking 1 year at a time. He's trying to win. Like there's more of an urgency right now than there was in 2010 when he took the job.
And more than that, there is more of an urgency. But more than that, his whole mentality is winning. Like he will try his very best to eke out every possible win. Now, Schneider sort of has to be committed to that approach too. You'd like to think, and more than that, the way that they spoke at that press conference and how Jody Allen had clearly empowered them to, hey, let's do it just as you done it in 2010. Let's come in, let's build this, young roster. It's complemented by the older guys they've got, but build this young roster, find the quarterback, but build the roster first if needs be. And they clearly felt empowered to do that. And Carroll in particular, Schneider looked like he hadn't slept, but Carroll in particular, he looked rejuvenated. He looked so excited at the prospect of, hey, what's happened, but we're just going to get together and go for it and try and win as many games as possible. Pete
is high on life. He doesn't need uppers. He's just all about, new dawn, new day. So also John's comments about how he said something we haven't done really well is we always want to add quarterbacks. And I think like, as in like the Ted Thompson model or even before him, Rod Wolf, was that who he mentioned? Mm-hmm. So like and maybe that ties into Russell Wilson's camp being upset, which in a vacuum makes sense. Like, why are you scouting the highest level quarterbacks right now as opposed to the ones that will be available later, whatever. But like that indicates that they clearly are going to add another quarterback this year. So they're going to draft one, even if they trade for one or if they sign one, there's a strong chance they might end up drafting one. So that indicates right then and there, if they thought Drew Lock was an absolute stud, they wouldn't have a need to draft one. So clearly they're going to be drafting they're going to be acquiring a new quarterback one way or another. I think that's kind of what's being tipped off. And maybe John shouldn't have said that. I think he felt like he had to say that in response to the reports that Wilson and Mark Rodgers were pissed off that he was scouting Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes and everyone else, and Drew Lock. I think.
Well, also to me, it kind of signifies that, like in a good way, that they're open to look at anyone who has an intriguing skill set. And in like Locke, right? And that he does have that second chance that Carroll spoke about, and that anything's on the table. Like he said, you have to look at the totality of the draft class, like and think about where we're going to take someone. Are we going to take them in maybe round 3 or round 5, and wait it out, like I was talking about, and to me, it just leaves the fact that anything's an option at this point. They want this open competition at quarterback. They will look to add to it, but how they do that, there's various options. As we're recording, they might go and trade for Baker Mayfield, which we'll come to.
Right. So I think all signs point to them adding someone.
But before that, they haven't actually added Geno Smith, but let's talk Geno. So last season he comes in, and it's a tough time because, Russell goes down, and he actually plays well against the Rams and gets unfortunate trying to lead them into a game-winning drive, or maybe it was game tying because he throws over the middle and Lockett slipped / got clipped, but it wasn't. It wasn't. It was incidental.
I think it was
contact.
an 8-point game.
Yeah, so
sure.
one score, but not really because a 2-point conversion is difficult. But yeah, especially with Geno. But Geno played well, and then they went to Pittsburgh, didn't they? And they struggled, and that's a really good defense, especially good against the pass. And they had some difficulty against the run. And really, that was this point in the season where Seattle could not get their run game going for a variety of reasons, which if they'd had that run game going, and I'm not even talking about to the level that it was so dominant down the stretch, I'm talking like actually being able to play to like a good level.
It was pretty good in the Pittsburgh game. Collins went for over 100 in that game. Yeah.
Oh, well, that's just a nonsense point then. Well,
no, I mean,
remember but the rest of the games they didn't really have it on.
The Steelers run,
and remember the Steelers run defense was like all-time awful.
Yeah.
So Geno, like that Jacksonville game is enough to like, because he was looking sharp. I mean, he was throwing great balls. He was incredibly accurate that game, right? He was sharp. He was dialed in. So that's enough to make you think, like, at the very minimum, like I bucket him with Locke. I don't want to see him starting next year. The very minimum, I think everybody was wanting to know what that Green Bay game would have looked like with Geno in there, because Russ clearly wasn't himself coming first game back, and the defense was playing really, really well that game. Maybe they win it with Geno. Can he squeak out 2 touchdowns? So, the type of I don't think Geno can handle a lot of volume. I think that he's kind of shaky in the pocket differently, but similarly enough, like Russ is, where he's going to take bad sacks. He's not always going to get the ball out when he should.
He's more of a classical. I don't want this to be misconstrued, but
he's a pocket quarterback.
He is a pocket quarterback,
necessarily a good pocket quarterback. You know what I mean?
Right, and sometimes he just his pocket sense isn't quite there, is it? Sometimes he steps back into, like you said, he sacks himself a bit.
So, but like he's trying to work the pocket. It's just not everyone.
And the way he escapes is often via moving up. Really, the issues for him seem to arise when he's trying to go backdoor a la Russell Wilson, and he doesn't have that.
If Geno Smith was your starting quarterback on any team, and say you had above average personnel everywhere, the offense that I think is ideal for him to be in, considering his arm and everything, is really the Ryan Tannehill LaFleur offense, not LaFleur, Arthur Smith offense, because their run rates are like incredibly high. Even in under center, they're like passing 28% of the time. They spend a lot of time in under center. Geno Smith can access those windows. If you give him AJ Brown and someone to alert the post with some of the play action concepts they run, I actually think Geno Smith with a really good supporting cast can actually maybe produce viable offense if you don't put too much on him. But I don't want to see that experiment in Seattle, though.
Well, the weird thing with when he came in as well was the Pittsburgh game. They tried all these like spread concepts, which weren't the identity of the offense at the time. And this is really anecdotal, and I need to go back and look at it. But forgive me, I haven't been grinding Geno Smith tape recently. But the way I remember it is they came in with all these kind of spread ideas to try and give him a comfort level of what had worked in, his time at West Virginia, coming from a Rich Rod offense. And they slowly kind of seem to cycle it back to being more of what the actual Seahawks offense was. And like, for instance, against the Jags, it was kind of the same. Like, it was more Arthur Smith or whatever than it had been against, when they'd been doing all the kind of spread stuff. But like I said, that's anecdotal, so I should probably actually confirm that. But the other thing with Smith is the DUI case, and I mean, reading his account of it, and well, an account which was published, that seems a bit weird. But they may. Why I raise that is they may be waiting to see if the league is going to hand down any punishment before signing him. Then again, it's not ideal to not have him signed when, if you want a competition, get them in as early as possible. You want all the quarterbacks out there. So,
yeah. So, right, like how many quarterbacks are they going to have on the roster in camp?
I think 5.
Think so?
Well, because you have Geno, you have and they'll that 5th guy will get cut like constantly, I think.
Oh yeah.
So
I also feel like it depends on if they actually get a true starter, like if they get a Baker Mayfield or Matt Ryan or whatever, what we're going to be talking about in a bit.
And so that's a good point, Ty, because I don't want Baker to come in and be given the job. I want him to have to fight for it and compete, and that's a bit difficult with him, because he would see himself as a starter, and then does he become disruptive?
Yeah,
it's not like Matt Flynn, where Matt Flynn like took it on the chin and became like a fine backup. I mean, he was getting paid to do that, so he's probably happy. But
I'll still always just be curious what Flynn would have looked like. You know what I mean? Just out of curiosity's sake.
Just out of over the middle sake.
I mean, like, just not even necessarily. Like, sure, but because Matt Flynn like captured everybody's attention, right? Like, even he was like a meme at that point. After that Green Bay game where he threw like 7 touchdowns, everybody was wondering, like, Aaron Rodgers was like, no, guys, this guy's actually a good quarterback. Granted, it's his friend. But he was like being as serious as Rodgers has ever been in the press conference. It's like, no, he's actually a good quarterback. Maybe that's true. Maybe it wasn't. We'll never know. Obviously, if he was actually good, he would have gotten another chance somewhere. That never happened. But, whatever.
Aaron Rodgers has never been super truthful in his press conferences. So.
That's true. That's true.
So, Griffin, do you agree with 5? Because the way I see it is Geno, Jacob Eason, rookie, and then Drew Lock, and then they just bring in a 5th guy who intrigues him as an undrafted free agent or has been around the league and has a big arm or has some kind of tools which they're into.
The only way they would roster less is if they traded for a veteran that is so far and away easily identified as the starter for 2022. So, like, if they traded for Matt Ryan's a starter. Even if you draft a guy that is going to be the future after Matt Ryan, I don't think of any rookie in this class, no matter how highly you rate them, can beat Matt Ryan out in camp. So I think at that point they go, whatever, Matt Ryan's the guy. We don't need to do this, go crazy. But if you don't trade for Ryan, then if you're going to draft a guy, even if you're super high on him, then there's still merit to cycling guys in, because it's just young quarterbacks. The vibe is different. Get 5 guys in there. Even if you sign Cam Newton or Colin Kaepernick, which I think they should look into doing either of those things, they should look into both of those options. And even if you draft one, get 4 or 5 guys in there, see what happens. Yeah. One thing we haven't talked about, we've referenced quarterbacks as it relates to Pete and John. I'd like to know what Shane Waldron thinks. I'd like to know what I hope that he's getting input. I'm sure he is. I'm sure Dave Canales is getting some input, but he's probably also just following orders too.
So Waldron's worked with obviously Goff, even Tom Brady, right? Very briefly as a quality control coach and then tight ends coach. So not really. Kirk Cousins when he was at Washington. So I guess that's interesting. And he was a grad assistant at Notre Dame from 2005 to 2007. The day this is me being a young football fan. I don't really know who their quarterback would have been.
Young chap.
Brady Quinn?
Was that Brady Quinn? Yeah, I think that was Brady
Wow.
Quinn era. Yeah.
There we go. So, I mean, that's I don't really know if we can draw much conclusions from that, but to that point, Griff, if you think about Pete, like Russell stood out because I mean Russell's completely unique as a quarterback, right? In how he plays the game, his elusiveness, but also his ability to play from the pocket and hit deep balls from the pocket.
I mean, most talented arm that Pete has ever been around in person. Like,
yeah, no doubt. And
he's
then
been around good quarterbacks. Carson Palmer has had a crazy arm.
And it would have been no doubt, and it would have been interesting to see, the Pete kind of Seattle experience as a team with a different quarterback. No, like you're saying with Flynn but anyone, just a different style of quarterback. But what we can say about that period is Russell was so highly efficient, crazily efficient, to which Carroll credited, and what Carroll wants in an ideal world from his rookie quarterback. He wants that efficiency, and he wants them to take care of the football. He wants balance. Ages ago, he said he wants to run, have as many rushing attempts as he had passing attempts. However, the way I've always taken that is in an ideal game, right? You've blown them out. You've probably passed more, right? But you've blown them out, and so because you played great defense, you played great special teams as well, and so you run the ball to end the game.
And his 50-50 comment also came when he was coaching in college.
Yeah,
over a decade, which 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, with Reggie Bush and
just Reggie Bush averaging 8 yards a touch.
And that O-line.
Go ahead.
So you say that, and that is a thing, but then he has also been very consistent in that he has mentioned the point guard idea time and time again. And if you compare his point guard comments from USC 2008 about Mark Sanchez to his point guard comments in his 2022 press conference, they ain't that different. They're basically the same thing. But it's very easy, again, it's easy to twist that negatively, but the way I see it is he just wants to make it easy on the quarterback because there's a lot going on. It's especially relevant. Heck, you might hate what he's saying, and with a superstar like Russell Wilson, it does get more thorny, and you can get into who initiated philosophical changes. You can get into who wanted to change the scheme and change the offense and pass more. Although, as you've shown, Pete has always passed actually a lot more than people would give him credit for. But anyway, you can get into all of that. Interrupt.
Well, just two things to bolster your point, really. So what he thinks might be making easy on the quarterback, to him, that might mean different things relative to each quarterback that he has.
There's no might. That's certain. He literally has said that.
I mean, he opened the press conference talking about adapting to players. And then further, when you mentioned when he said 50-50 in USC, he said that under the context of one being a college coach, but he also said that while coaching teams with pass rates that were moderately above average, and some years even close to the top relative to the teams in his conference in the Pac-10. So Pete was saying that while actually being leaning pass compared to his contemporaries' averages, at the time. So that's he was saying that while actually being a little bit more pass heavy than people thought. And, you know, so it's just he's way more flexible than I think people realize. And when he says making it easy on his quarterback, I mean, I'll keep yelling this from the rooftops. If you write down however granularly you want to like get however specific you want to get, if you write down all the passes, types of passes, routes, concepts, whatever that Russ is good at, and then you list out all the ones that he's not so good at, statistically speaking, Seattle is always like in the top 3 to 7 range of the passes that he's really good at in terms of raw attempts and attempts per snap, not just per pass, but per total offensive snap. And then the ones that he's not so good at, they do like a leaguing minimum, like a lead as in the least amount. So to him, that's saying, Russ, we're building the offense out of you. You are the offense. We're doing everything that you're good at. We're going to do as much as we possibly can.
Well, like when Mike Dugar asked Pete Carroll about why they don't throw, why all the throws are outside the numbers or near the numbers with
Which
Russ.
is a great question.
And Pete just
shoot it away.
Yeah, because
like, I don't know
heck, there might be a reason why that, and Pete knows there's a reason.
So this is where, it sounds like we're, depending on who's listening, however you parse it, we're going from, like, we're defending Pete. So to his point, like if you look at Russ's heat maps, every year where it's just a total absence of over the middle. Now, Jimmy Graham, 2016, 2017, there's actually a sea of red, meaning a concentration of targets over the middle. As I've said on this podcast 1,000 times, I think you should get Russ a Jimmy Graham type tight end or a big slot receiver like Sidney Rice or even like Brandon Marshall, Julio Jones. They put those guys in the slot a lot on third downs especially. And then you'll see more of those attempts from him. So even though we're defending Pete here, at the same time, you'd think, how do you not see the success with Jimmy Graham and try to balance out your passing attack a little bit more?
That being said,
ball distribution.
Jimmy Graham is a unicorn.
He's a unicorn, but I mean, granted, they wanted to get Noah Fant, right? So maybe that's what they were trying to do. It's not like you can snap your fingers and just generate, an elite target that is 6'3", has a sub 7'3" cone, can catch with his hands in traffic, that you can put in the slot and get off the line against slot corners. You know what I mean? Like, that's all easier said than done. But I'll always think like Russ has an inherent weakness there. You should try to roster so as to help that weakness, to give your offense more balance. But I also understand it's not something you can easily do. So it's just to stay neutral there. But
no, we are. I think
we're fair and balanced.
We try to stay objective. And that we don't care about, Pete Carroll doesn't know us. We don't.
But
we're not getting anything out of this.
Pete was clearly trying to not acknowledge that question, though.
He was, and it was very interesting. Great question from Mike. So the interesting thing as well is, so Carroll's comments, which again they match his 2022 comments. His comments from a 2011 appearance on the Kevin Calabro show on 710 ESPN in 2011. He said, we're not trying to make our quarterback the guy that's got to throw the ball 40 times a game. We want a guy that manages the offense really well and can keep us moving and get us into the best plays that allows the whole team to function. All the way back to the USC days, that's all we've ever asked of our quarterbacks, blah, blah, blah. And, that got tweeted out by Danny Kelly, who obviously used to be the big-time editor at Field Goals, does great work now at The Ringer. And everyone sort of piles onto that, and there's the focus on, why wouldn't you want your quarterback to pass 40 times a game? That's how they get results. And I understand that, and this sort of fantasy football ification of the game is definitely a thing too. But why I bring all this up is in that same Field Goals article where these quotes appear by, let's get the author, Scott Enyart. In that same article, there's another quote from Carroll where he was invited to the Elite 11 quarterback competition in Malibu, California, in that same offseason by Trent Dilfer and Yogi Roth. And he said, all we've ever tried to do with our quarterbacks is make them perform like they're capable of performing. And so, you kind of just have to look at that and realize that even if you're upset by the other stuff Pete's saying, right? He wants to make things easy on the quarterback. So ignoring the Russell Wilson past, and I mean, when we say that they tried to get to kick it on, they did. Whoever initiated that change is irrelevant now, in my opinion, because the stuff Pete's talking about is perfect for a rookie passer coming in. It's perfect for a guy who's beat down like Drew Lock. It's perfect for a guy who showed some flashes and has a lot of talent in Geno Smith, but is again, he's been beat down in the past. It's perfect for that second chance. It's perfect for that newcomer who's raw, because it's not asking them to do too much at the start. It's taking the load off their shoulders, and it's trying to accentuate what they're good at, which is Carroll's philosophy for every position. And it sounds stupid to say that, but he ain't a square peg in a round hole guy, generally speaking. Now, we could get into the defense again and the kind of 3-4 stuff they're trying to do with 4-3 defensive end. That's a whole.
It doesn't mean he always
discussion,
succeeds, but that's his
no,
intention,
but his
right?
and you can see it. There's multiple examples over the years of him trying to, and almost to a fault, right? Like with the Percy Harvin trade, when they're sort of forcing the one thing they think he's elite at, and it's just not working in like the fly sweep stuff, or even with Jimmy Graham and his early struggles, where they tried to make him into this kind of inline down the seam threat, but that required blocking that he couldn't really do within the whole offense. And so
was Jimmy Graham coming into a team that runs under center,
right,
not
and
even
so,
that much under center.
And so then they devised a role for, they're like, hey, this ain't gonna work like this. Let's get you the ball out wide and just use your vertical threat, what you're good at. So they do this, and so whatever you think about the point guard stuff, and it is open for discussion, and I can see a thing where you're like, oh my gosh, this ain't the modern quarterback. This isn't how it is, but it is. Like,
so
Scott McLuhan, he did a great interview on Rob Statton's new podcast called The Rebuild, and he's saying the same things. You can't just throw a quarterback in there, because it'll be, especially a quarterback in this draft class, because none of them are ready to just pass 40 times a game. And people don't understand, I don't think, really. Well, even Mahomes sat for a year.
Yeah. So, first, because we have 10 years of Pete press conferences, I think that if we had another coach, it would sound pretty similar. Like, what Pete says in press conferences is not that off the wall. It's not that different than even guys that are like super aggressive anyway. Like, they verbalize very similar things. Like Sean McVay talks about every year it starts at the run. Now, Sean McVay has pretty high pass rates. Kyle Shanahan says the same thing, and Kyle Shanahan is way more run heavy than Pete Carroll has been.
Mm-hmm.
So like they have fundamental, differences about what football is and should be. And then even again, to bring up his point guard comment when he mentioned at USC, like again, contextualize that relative to what his peers were doing in the Pac-10 and other college programs. Pete was passing more than a good chunk of them, not anything crazy, but a good chunk of them. And like once every 4 years, they were passing like maybe top 3, top 2 in the Pac-10. It was still like 34 passes to 30 runs in those 2 years, but like there's a lot of running going on in the Pac-10. It was a running league, that conference. And then the other thing is that Pete has also said, if you want to like pass 40 times, he also said in one of those, and this is my anecdotal recollection, so I might be wrong. And I was looking for it, I couldn't find it, but he also said in one of those, he said, if you think you can, some guys want to build a big passing game and they think that's how they can win, then sure, go for it. He's passing that off as a philosophical difference. But the key point there is that he's saying, if you think you can do it. So really, when Pete talks about what he's talking about, he's defending what they're doing, and he's couching it as though it's something he just inherently believes in, and which is, I think, in part definitely true. But it's also, I think there's some sub-commentary there on that he thinks that he can't do that with Russell Wilson. And I know that sounds crazy because it's Russell Wilson. How could you say that? He's making a comment on what his quarterback strengths and weaknesses are. Like I said earlier, they already do as much of the stuff that Russ is good at as possible. To do any more, you're pushing the limits of like diminishing returns. You can only throw so many balls over 20 yards in the game. You can only do so much play action. Also, they do a lot of play action. People think like they don't do a lot of play action. They're like top 5, top 7, top 3 some years in play action percentage every year. And that's not just per pass. That's, again, per total offensive snap. Russ is pretty stable in quick game most of the time. You can't have 60% of your gun passes be quick game. You can only do so much of it. They're already pushing 30%, which is top 3 every year. You can only do so much of it. So you're asking then the passes that you have to add in order to pass more to get the 40 passes a game are the passes that Russ's success rate is like bottom 5. So as you increase the volume with Russell Wilson, you're adding the passes that he literally sucks at. Mm-hmm. Now, for what I'm saying here, like 5-step passing, which is supposed to be the meat and potatoes of any offense. That's what you build out of. His EPA per play is usually pretty good, but that's because of the 5-step fade or 5-step go ball and the over routes. But again, you can only do so much of those within your 5-step sample. Everything else is intermediate stuff. You got to go through a progression. You got to hit the guy open on time. That's good at that. His success rate is literally ranked 25 to 35 every single year, except for 2020. And that it also tanked in the second half of the season, but that's why it worked in 2020 until it didn't. So they ask him he says, well, if you think you can do it 40 times a game, that's great. To me, that was him slipping almost, because he's defending Russ every time he brings up, why aren't you passing a lot? Well, we just fundamentally believe in doing a lot of running and balance and stuff. That's what we believe in, control the clock. But when he said, if you think you can do a bunch of passing, do it. He knows he can't, because he knows what the numbers are. He knows what concepts you have to add in if you're going to add more volume. And he knows, and Russ knows statistically, he is not good at it. Now, Russ may still want to do more passing in spite of it. But to me, that's not any different than going to the NBA and saying, hey, don't take long 2s, layups and 3s. Mm-hmm. Pete said, like players do things that are like players have different views of themselves as outsiders do, right? And Pete, as a coach, probably thinks more highly of himself than maybe outsiders do coaching wise, right? So it applies to him too. But it's no different than the NBA having a 3-point revolution. Pete, looking at his past sample, is saying like, dude, we're not going to be better if you do this. Now, that said, the counter argument is, are inefficient passes still more efficient than inefficient runs? Maybe. They very well could be. But the other thing is, it's not just that. You're also trying to balance out what you are good at in gun. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to get too far into it, but it's like running has a dual effect. It's not just to replace passes, but it's to balance out tendency. It's about tendency and eliminating negative plays.
And I think
a no gain is better than a negative play. But whatever.
Something to be said about rhythm, tempo, stalling drives, and really just going back. I mean, what you said there was great, but circling back to how whatever the coach, they're not going to speak in such blunt terms, just like it's all on the quarterback, or like it's all on passing at really, really, really high rate, because they're a head coach. Real basic point, but they have to galvanize their whole team. They're not going to outwardly say something like that. And you need the whole offense in it together, thinking, hey, I'm going to get this money on this, on this play and whatnot. So you can't just. I think it has damaging effects to be like, hey, we're just going to. Our offense is all pass, like in terms of morale. I don't think you can motivate a team like offensive linemen. If you told them, hey, we're just going to pass, our team is built on passing 100% of the time, they would absolutely they'd hate you, because dropping back to pass for every single time is difficult.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you guys your thoughts on this, because Pete and John both talked about the opportunity to trade Russ. It was hard to put together, but it didn't really seem like they were going to be able to get to the finish line. All this stuff. Then there was a report later. I unfortunately forget who reported it, that they have been actually talking to teams, going to teams, talking about Russ for the last 3 or 4 years. So, what do you think about that, and how that kind of goes into what you guys are talking about right now? That maybe there has been more of a willingness from the organization to move on than maybe they've let on.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know how much of that is Schneider just being this kind of GM who's always constantly trying to work deals. To me as well, it speaks to perhaps discontent that's existed, but you don't know who started it, right? But to me, it speaks to discontent that's existed for a while, and possibly, if you sort of think about stuff that's come out in the media from other sources, other camps about Pete and John. It's well, where's that come from? Is Russell Wilson unhappy with certain things? And then, to me, it's telling that the Dallas playoff loss keeps getting referenced because that is a real emotional game to bring up, because everyone was like, why the heck did they run so much and only let Russ go at the end? And really, that's such a fiery thing to have, and it's a great thing if you were Wilson's camp, and to sort of have as this kind of point to bring up when if you then look at 2019, 2020 and what they did then, they went more pass heavy, and the Dallas game was actually an anomaly for the 2018 season, right? So we don't know who really started the discontent, but as soon as you start getting doubts as a GM that, hey, Russell ain't gonna re-sign here, so we should probably start just getting people alert to the idea that if you were to put an offer, here's what it is.
So the other real quick though, my comments about Pete thinking maybe you can't pass the ball 40 times with Russ or whatever, I don't think that means, even if Pete thinks that, I don't think that means that Pete values Russ less. I think Pete valued Russ greatly, immensely. And in fact, I think it's ironic. Russ was John's guy and Pete warmed up to the idea of Russ and embraced him. By the end of it, I think Pete was more stingy about holding on to Russ than John was.
Yeah. And to the point, right? Who deals with the agent there? So
the GM.
I really do think Mark Rodgers had a very negative impact on the relationship with John Schneider, because he's a good negotiator. Mark Rodgers, at the end of the day,
he's a good agent.
You could say he did a great job for Russ. Okay, Russ could Russ could collapse in Denver, but he got him paid again.
So
biggest trade ever.
I don't know whoever initiated. I bet you both sides legitimately in their heart of hearts believe the other camp initiated it. I think by the end of it though, which is why they said was mutual.
Yeah, which is why they said it was mutual. And it probably is. They see a report and they're like, what? Why would that camp do this?
And credit to Russ. Even if there were disagreements, when Russ was never not committed to whatever they did that year. He still was a good soldier and he, went along with it. The complaints came up in the off season, but in the season, I believe that mid-season he was a coachable player. He wasn't causing problems directly.
That said, Mike Dugar, he went on again. He's getting another shout out, but he went on the Around the NFL podcast and he said how some players thought Russ wasn't all the way in during the latter half of 2021.
And how much of that was accelerated by him busting up his finger and
after that period?
Sure, but also Rashad Penny. Sorry to cut you off. Rashad Penny. If Rashad Penny didn't go off the way he did, would he have been a little more? I don't know.
Yeah,
they probably would have kept passing more.
Well, So I found that interesting. And then it made me think how Tyler Lockett and the Russ trade in general, right? That got me thinking about how Tyler Lockett and Nick Ballore, it turns out they were the ones. I think I got this from the Pedestrian podcast where Nick Ballore was interviewed, and by Stuart Court and Adam Nathan. Nick Ballore was interviewed, and he said how him and Tyler Lockett were responsible each week for putting together a presentation for the team, like to sort of motivate them. And then it got me thinking, like, why is Russ not in that kind of leadership role? But that's kind of overthinking it, because that's it's kind of a joke.
Russ is sending those. He's giving his receivers homework, supposedly, with scouting reports and stuff. So who knows? Overall, I mean, at least Russ is a smart dude. He at least shows that he was happy for the cameras. But he's a smart guy, obviously.
That's actually something, like, to Ty's question about, who sort of kicked this off. If that was your question, I can't really.
It was more like about maybe the team having more of a willingness to trade him than they let on.
Right. Well,
I think it was a lot earlier than they did.
So it was what happened as well since we last recorded is those statements from the team.
Right.
Actually, no, they may have come out then, but I guess we didn't talk about them. But those statements where no, they hadn't happened, because it was during Russell's press conference that they decided to just drop that. And they basically implied they didn't even imply, they just said it, that Russ wanted out and Russ wanted this, and that was that. That doesn't exclude it from being a mutual thing. But the blame was very shifted, and that spoke more.
They also had to agree to it at the end of the day.
Yeah.
They had to agree to do it. Yeah.
But anyway, it's happened. So draft. I mean, we're both in agreement, Griffin, right? That they have to take a quarterback.
Yeah. So even if the football gods give us some wish fulfillment and trade Matt Ryan for a 3rd round pick, and they make the cap hits work, and hallelujah, still draft one. The quarterbacks I think of particular note in this draft are Desmond Ridder and Malik Willis, and they're both like very different quarterbacks. They're both very exciting quarterbacks. One's more similar to Russell Wilson. One is very unlike Russell Wilson. I don't know Malik Willis is getting a lot of hype. Is he going to go top 5? He might. Most years that he should be going in the 2nd round. I think Desmond Ridder is the best quarterback in the draft, but he should be going in the bottom half of the 1st round. I think like last year he goes 3rd or 4th. But I still think you can be excited about him in last year's draft. Anyway, I don't know. So, Matty, what are your general thoughts on Malik Willis, Desmond Ridder, Matt Corral, Pickett, Spencer Rattler? Didn't he declare?
No.
Or did he not? Oh, okay, never mind. Psych, just kidding.
I think he could be QB1 if he declared.
Yeah.
But I mean, he's had a rough college career.
Oh, no doubt. But that speaks to the nature of the quarterback class. Yeah.
That's true.
So,
I knew he didn't.
There's also Howell, who has a little bit of helium, and Carson Strong. Those are like the top 6 guys.
Right.
So Schneider said, again, Mike Dugar. Mike Dugar asked him about quarterbacks, and Schneider said how, as I referred to, you have to look at the totality of the class, and saying about how Russell Wilson's, Tom Brady's, they appear in the class, and he said that they want to do a better job of getting quarterback options, as you referenced, Griff, like his time in Green Bay. And so the kind of Ridders and Willises, where, as I was saying, as McLuhan referenced, these kinds of quarterbacks will naturally get pushed up. And McLuhan was saying how it takes one team with a slightly more pushy owner or slightly less secure general manager to go, hey, we need this guy. If he's your guy, let's just take him now. Especially with owners not understanding fantasy football, not understanding football and playing it more like fantasy football, and we need that quarterback. And it takes one team to trade up, take the quarterback, and then another team's like, oh no, we only like one of the other quarterbacks. So say Detroit takes Willis because Detroit picks 2 anyway, right? And then the other team's like, crap. Like there's Ridder and there's no one. Well, then they're trying to come up to 3, and then that's that. So I don't think, as I was saying earlier, I don't think Seattle is in a position where Schneider should feel insecure based on what they were saying about Jody Allen. And heck, if they get 1 year and they do go 5-12, 5-12, yep, 5-12, that works. Good mathematics. Yeah. We won't get into the math or maths deal. If they do that, and then they fire Schneider, I am going to be so disappointed in Jody Allen, because if you've told them, hey, if they're not lying to us and they've been told, do it again, like build it up. Do you remember the early years? Like, I mean, there was Beastquake, which is amazing, but like 2010 was a rebuild, and this isn't a rebuild because they have some talent on the roster. Griffin and I think much more of the overall roster than most people, I'd say. Like, I think there's a lot to work with there. You just obviously have lost that quarterback, but I don't think, to finish this ramble, I don't think Seattle's front office should feel pressed into trading up for like a quarterback. I think they'll wait it out, and I think at number 9, they could take a great player. They could trade down. We'll have a bit more of a draft preview going on as we sort of build up to it, because it's still being slotted in. But I'd be surprised if they trade up. That being said, Malik Willis is the kind of player that kind of ticks a lot of the, like, realistically, he's very unfinished and would need time, in my opinion. But he is the kind of player who has traits where I could see, and you know, if the big thing and why this is so silly is we don't get to talk to these prospects. We don't get to go, you know, this and that and ask them like normal questions and check that they have the right mental makeup to succeed in the league. And heck, teams aren't that great at that either, because, you know, quarterbacks, if there was an exact science to it, quarterbacks would hit every time, right? But right. And no one would miss on any draft pick ever. But because we don't get to see that, then we don't know. Now, Seattle would have spoke to him at the Senior Bowl, and at the Senior Bowl, he was good, by the way. But I could see them taking him at 9, because they're like, the ceiling is so high. Like, his ceiling is like crazy, because he has the NFL arm. He's accurate downfield with it. He has touch on deep passes as well. At the Senior Bowl, he showed himself executing NFL concepts in terms of and over the middle too, reading flat defender well. It'd like a bit more anticipation out of him, but there's a variety of reasons why we didn't see that. It is just a projection, because he's coming from this Liberty offense, which has elements to it which don't really translate. But also their offensive line was a complete mess, especially last season. And it's kind of like he's just out there. But the fact, the big thing with the offensive line being bad was he showed poise and a real awareness of when to go. Like, he's not like Russell in the sense, he's like Russell in the sense that he has a great arm. He's the most Russ-like quarterback in that sense. He can throw moon balls, not to the Russell level, but he can throw deep incredibly well. And Senior Bowl one-on-ones, that showed up so nice. But he's not like Russell in the sense that when he's back in the pocket, he ain't looking to scramble back door. He's a bit more of a pocket guy, and he'll scramble up. Now, he's one heck of a runner, and he's very tough. But he's not fast like Russell. To me, there's elements which are like Cam Newton, especially how he kind of transitions his weight on deep throws. There's elements which are like Colin Kaepernick as a runner, and elements like Lamar Jackson with his slippery jukes, which is why comparisons are stupid, because you can see a lot of quarterbacks in him. But he does have a high sack rate, and sometimes that's because he didn't want to take the check down, which that's kind of like Russ, and he wanted to go downfield. But really, I saw more of a willingness to stand in the pocket and read out concepts. He doesn't always want to go scramble, but sometimes he does, if that makes sense. The most worrying thing I saw was he flat out just didn't see, or like didn't recognize, or just didn't throw, but I don't know why that would be the case, completely open guys over the deep middle, which ain't like Russ, because Russ will throw like deep middle, but like
loves the post, loves the deep over, yeah.
Right, but there's like deep posts and like even like back of the end zone slant in the red zone where
Absolutely.
he see is what like butt naked, but I think what's happened is he's seen it's single high, check the safety, and just assumed that safety's just stayed in the middle when the safety hasn't, and he ain't checked that, and that ain't a first round pick. Like that's a project where, hey, let's get you into a thing where you're seeing these reads, but also you're reacting post snap and fixing problems post snap for us, and that's the big thing in the NFL, which you got to be able to do, really, like adjust to the defense and the call and whatnot. So that's, I mean, I've just spoke a lot about Willis and haven't let you speak, Griffin,
No,
so.
I mean, I'm aligned with you. So he is a project, and anyone that drafts him, especially Seattle, we know that they know that's what they're signing up for. Now, it is of note that, granted, at the Senior Bowl, like in the practices and stuff, that they don't have an offensive line, right, to see over. And I think part of his middle of the field access issues is in part vision.
Well, no, related. They do have an offensive line.
Well, at least what I was watching, the 7-on-7.
Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah.
So, but that said, he showed more by way of processing, reading things out, reading the coverage, letting defender techniques take him to the receiver. He showed more in that concentrated period than he ever did in college, which makes me believe.
Well, what I'd say as well, to your point, they did have an offensive line when they came out in full team scrimmage, and he still showed the same stuff you're talking about.
That's great. Yeah. I actually haven't watched that part, so I need to watch that. That'd be pretty helpful, maybe. But the fact that he showed more of the Senior Bowl than maybe he did over his entire last season at Liberty demonstrates to me, or tells us, that Liberty wasn't trying to really coach him. They weren't really trying to invest in him. They're basically saying, we can win our league, we can dominate our conference, at least offensively, just based off your floor. Like what you are right now, it's all we need, and we're just going to go scheme with that. And so that shows that if he did that much of the Senior Bowl, we can probably assume that he was being coached to do those things. Probably means he can take to coaching, right? What is concerning, though, still about reading things out, like, so he's like all to the sideline, makes crazy field throws, different trajectory field throws, the fade, the outs, the corners, it's all there. The thing, though, is that, like, it will take him half a quarter to figure out what palms is, and they're trapping like the out and stuff, and he's still throwing it right into the sail defender. And then second half against Syracuse, he's totally gaming that curl flat defender, like outsmarting him and making some awesome throws.
Oh, he's not, like, he legit, like, his arm to throw into the field, it is a rocket still, and into cover 2, as you were talking about. He can beat a safety aligned into the boundary. He can beat that safety into the honey hole, which that should not be happening. And it's against the Syracuses of the world, so it ain't an NFL kind of athlete, but still, I mean,
And so then the other thing is, think NFL hashes versus college hashes. Maybe he shouldn't have attempted some of those, like they're pretty ballsy throws. But in the NFL, that's shorter distance. They're going to be more available if you scale that, to the same decision making. The throws are going to be more available. It's ironic. He's more likely to throw a corner into the honey hole against cover 2 than Russ. But then at the same time, like you said earlier, he's less likely to throw a deep post against middle of the field open than Russ is. Russ will throw the super deep post if Tyler Lockett could turn around that near safety. Then the other thing is, the arm talent. Maybe there's something there with developing him with more like true drop back passes if he can take the coaching. You're acknowledging that he's a project, but like the question is, outside of that, where are the easy completions coming from? With Russ, the easy completions are coming from like stick, quick game concept, and slants or slant flat, quick game concepts. His version of stick was like spacing. And he didn't always read it up perfectly, but that's where he's getting the ball out a little bit more quicker on average for him. So like spacing he's comfortable with, but you just wonder like Liberty, they ran some Hank and he looked okay running Hank at times. It still seemed a tick slow. If he could just speeds up his internal clock, if he has maybe, I don't know, a little bit just more like mentorship and coaching and just more structure around him, maybe there's something there, but it's still a project. And I don't know if you want to take that in the first round. And just speaking, yeah.
So the other thing on to your point of the easy completions, it's a great one because Liberty, especially they were like a lot more run heavy than I thought they would be going in, and I think that kind of speaks to they didn't have those kind of easy completions there for him. And you said about the spacing thing. Well, that's because like there's an obviously uncapped slot and it's college and it's so spread out. And yeah, you can do that in the NFL, but a lot less often for a lot less yards, right? Generally speaking, because of the level of athlete, the hash marks, all that kind of deal. I actually think NFL hash marks might help his game in a weird kind of way because it kind of makes the over the middle field less over the middle. Not that he has an issue necessarily over the middle, and he showed that at the Senior Bowl, but I just think it opens up a bit more of either side to him more rather than constricting him boundary field and with like it does with college hashes. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, but to focus on the thing with him is every time I was watching him, I was like, well, the thing is here, we can work with this, like in the sense that he has that arm where he can throw those one-on-one routes. So if you get a clear one-on-one, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in college, he's facing a ton of drop eight. The game to watch in college, really, where he struggled is Louisiana Monroe, where they dropped. They played a lot of three high kind of shell, disguised the coverages a lot, played a lot of drop eight, played a lot of cloud, kind of like the Russell recipe to beat Russell, for a Seahawks analogy. Not necessarily the drop eight, but cloud over the stud number one receiver kind of dude. And he struggled with that. But if you get him in an NFL thing where you're running the ball, you're having that balance, and you're trying to get teams out of too high. I'm not saying he has an issue necessarily against too high, although actually he kind of does. But if you give him the clear one-on-one, I mean, there's only so much you can. He throws it accurately on time, in rhythm. I mean, I think you can work with that. I think you can win with that. Now, you do have to work on a lot of the other things, but you can, as a defense coordinator, if a team's in 12 personnel and they're running the heck out of the football, you're going to have to leave a one-on-one at some point. And Seattle has Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, and I think he can hit a variety of the one-on-one throws in the NFL. So that's why I could talk myself into him at 9. I really could. Because of that ceiling, and if it all clicks, bang.
Listen, if they take him at 9, then that means they're committing to doing all those things that you just said. So in that vein, yeah, I can wrap my head around watching that unfold. Selfishly speaking, while I don't think as good as I think Russell Wilson is, I think coming out Wilson is far more ahead of where Willis is coming out.
Yeah,
even.
no doubt.
And but just watching Russ stylistically, selfishly, I want a differently styled quarterback.
So I think we disagree on how similar they are. Like, I don't think he's the same style, but I know what you mean in the sense that you just want a guy who's a damn statue who just stands back there. You want Tom Brady, and Bruce, pick up the phone
just because for the culture shock of watching a different type of guy. But to me, that's in this draft. That's who Desmond Ridder is.
Good segue. Yeah, that is Desmond Ridder because he stands back there, and even though he ran a 4.52 official 40-yard dash time, he doesn't doesn't use his legs that often, and he actually kind of runs like a giraffe, and you do worry about him. But against SMU, he had 2 really long touchdown runs that were interspersed with him vomiting on the field. So clearly he wasn't feeling that good, but he had like legit, I think it was like a 95-yard touchdown run. He has wheels, but he doesn't use them that often because he sits in the pocket. And I mean, I don't watch quarterbacks that often, for obvious reasons, being there used to be a guy called Russell Wilson in Seattle, right? But I'm shocked how advanced he is in terms of like reading stuff out. And this is something Mark Schofield highlighted. He's got a YouTube channel. You should check him out. His work's everywhere. Great guy, Mark.
Yeah.
But
Great.
he fixes stuff post snap. That's how Mark phrased it, and that's a great way of phrasing it, because he reads out coverages, and like if it changes, he knows where he's going. Like if they're showing middle field close, right, and then they go into too high, he ain't panicking. He knows what to do, and defenses did throw a few things at him. You could say Cincinnati had a better kind of talent than most of their opponents, but he's still seeing stuff and playing from the pocket as you'd like. I was really impressed with him, and it was. I'm not really sure about his. I think he's the most ready from day one, just because of this experience. There's a few things I'm not sure about, which I guess we'll get to. But his anticipation, like you know when someone's playing. So like with Willis, I want to credit with him with some anticipation, because he has this little ball tap where this guy, so he taps the ball to sync up the timing of the lower body and his mechanics so he can deliver the throw. But oftentimes he's throwing it late, and I think that's partly because their receivers ran a lot of option routes, and then at the Senior Bowl, he's obviously less familiar with the receivers, so the timing's off, so he's just ensuring the completion. However, that ball tap is kind of, the ball should have been out on the ball tap. Like you're delaying it. It's late.
You're saying ball tap a lot.
Well, there you go. I don't know how else to describe it.
Ball pat.
We all love a ball tap, unless it makes the ball late. So Ridder,
better late than early in that case.
Oh, no doubt. So Ridder, though, his anticipation is nuts, and how he's reading the coverage. He's a maniac. Like he's an actual maniac. He throws the outside post against middle field open, like so early. He plays quarterback like I tried to play Madden, in that I'm like, here's the coverage, bang, the ball's out. Oh, it's on the stupidly hard difficulty where the guy does a like spring jump.
Where the middle linebacker teleports 15 feet to intercept.
Yeah, and I'm like, well, that's not middle field open, is it? Because the middle linebacker's literally like prime Bobby Wagner combined with prime, I don't know, other good middle linebacker in Tampa 2. Anyway, Ridder does this kind of stuff, and even like against single high, he sees the rotation down. He's like, bang, I know where I'm going. And again, as I said, Mark did a great job highlighting this as well. But
so you know who in the pocket he reminds me of against like pressure and stuff, and maybe it's just exposure bias, but Matt Ryan. There are absolutely similarities to how he works through pressure, preempts pressure, and that means he will take some sacks. His sack rate is not high, but he will take what looks like some bad sacks because he's trying to maximize the concept versus the coverage. It's like a different type of eating the ball.
Talking exposure bias, the thing with Ridder is I like him probably more than I should. Well, no, I don't think that's right.
Because of what you're transitioning from.
Exactly. Because of the past, because of what Russell Wilson was. And Desmond Ridder's restored my faith in too high beaters. Like, he sees the corner going low, and he's throwing the smash route, the deep corner behind the cornerback, this corner route behind the cornerback. He's throwing it before the cut. And he's throwing it at his receiver so that the half safety who's screwed all the way across to cheat that route combination can't make a play, and the ball's caught. And I'm just, I mean, like, stick against middle field closed, bang, bang, bang.
You can throw stick dig with him. You can throw like stick nod. So like against like curl concept where you're wrap concepts where you're isolating a curl defender or a quarter flat defender. I mean, he's really good at getting that ball out with anticipation. If he's trying to split two hook defenders or like the hook and the far curl or quarter flat defender, like he can get the ball out on time, but relative to the defenders that are squeezing the window, he like can throw back hip, back shoulder to protect the ball away from leverage. Like, you know, who's the master of that is Tom Brady. And Matt Ryan does that well too. Matt Ryan's a good quarterback. Ridder just does a lot of these things at an advanced level. And another caveat to all of this is that Cincinnati, they were a highly ranked team. They are not that talented.
Well,
Ridder maximized them. Like Cincinnati does not belong in the same field with like Alabama, for example.
So that it's all relative, right?
It's all relative, but like relative to when they played better teams, Notre Dame.
So that's the interesting thing, right? So when they played Notre Dame, that highlighted some issues, but also like Notre Dame were like very arrogant with it. Well, I shouldn't say that because I've watched literally one game of their defense, and they do some smart things, especially pressure wise. I was like big into that, but they basically played cover one, and they were like, "We're better than you." And Ridder had some issues, which we'll get to, but also he made some throws and he anticipated, and they played cover three as well. And he threw beaters, and Pierce, which is the big talent guy, Alec Pierce on the outside for him. Ridder found him nice. You are right though that against like the Alabamas,
and he still made some throws. Like early on, he clearly has the jitters. He's trying to adjust to their speed.
So that's the thing. So the jitters are. I didn't see the same level of poise necessarily as I did with Malik Willis. Like Willis just looks calm constantly, whereas Ridder in the pocket occasionally has jittery moments, which partly pocket quarterbacks because they ain't got the elusiveness generally that they do kind of have to jitter because they're about to get hit rather than run away. And Ridder can run away, like he does occasionally do that.
4-5, yeah.
Yeah, 4-5, and he did it when he was.
And
under
he'll make
pressure.
some off-platform scrambling throws too.
But he did have sort of moments where I'm like, is this guy like rattled? Because that was kind of a thing. And then so the other thing is his arm strength and his arm delivery, and his arm strength to me is straight like that could be a problem, like because he doesn't have much zip on the ball. Now, in terms of like getting the ball out quickly, he gets it out quickly. It's just sometimes just the ball just hangs, like far hash kind of deep concepts.
The ball does die sometimes. What gives me more hope though is the boundary fades when he has to uncork one, or even the boundary goes. I think that demonstrates that he's kind of reining it in a little bit when he's really trying to uncork one deep, like on the deep post. So almost like it was, I can't take credit for this, but Nate Tice, super smart guy, says it looks like he tweeted, it looks like he's over aiming the post. But like, to me, like that might be a habit thing. Maybe that can be coached. Like, hey, dude, just let it rip. Tyler Lockett is going to be, who gets more? I mean, few guys get more separation than Tyler Lockett on the post, right? Against cover three, one high or two high. If he has a lot of trust in Tyler Lockett to get crazy separation, he might just launch it, and Lockett may not have to run under it as much or slow his pace. The boundary fades, the boundary goes, give me a little bit more hope that maybe it's him kind of being a little more conservative with his throws than he needs to be. But like he'll throw those intermediate benders on like one-on-one with the mic, over the mic, under the safeties. He'll throw those with complete conviction. He's not holding those back at all. So maybe it's just his mind needs to be open up. But I understand what you're saying. He is not an elite arm. I think he has an okay arm, and it might be better than what we're seeing. There isn't like naturally like great accuracy, but again, like in some contexts against zone, there is. A lot of his inaccuracy that you see early in games, I think, are related to the jitters thing. So I don't know if the book is completely written on him with accuracy, but
it's just, but again, like UCF, he comes out, he throws dig hitch from against trips versus cover two. Now his receiver drops the ball, and there's not much zip on the ball, and it's from the far hash, but he's throwing the dig like in between the curl with the reading out the mic. I haven't
So
seen
here,
quarterback do that for so long.
relate him to Goff's arm. I think he has a stronger base than Goff, and he like
He's a
credit to
genius, bro.
he's a genius, but like arm talent wise, consider I think
Okay.
Goff is a great reference point because of who the offensive coordinator is. And if you draft Desmond Ridder, Shane Waldron, I don't know how Pete might shape that, the rest of the staff, but Shane Waldron's thinking, I'm going to run the Goff offense, but it's going to be even better. I'm going to be able to challenge the post. I'm going to be able to expect the ball to be on time even more.
So it's Stafford. It's the Stafford.
It's like
it's Stafford
light.
without the arm.
It's Stafford light schematically. What would Matt Ryan be in this offense? It would be Shane Waldron's looking at what Sean McVay's doing with Stafford and going, "Oh, I got an idea. Let's
maybe tune down the arm slightly, but yeah."
Yeah, certainly. Like you're not going to see the crazy throws against 2-man where Stafford is like needling it in 35 yards downfield with Ryan, but Ryan is still going deep. In my opinion, his arm isn't falling off that much. I think that they don't have Julio Jones anymore, and Calvin Ridley was out, and the only person that can get downfield is Kyle Pitts.
And he didn't even have Kyle Pitts for the whole season either.
Right. Like Russell Gage who's like a possession slot receiver. So I think
he's about to be an all-pro with Tom Brady, probably.
Yeah. Yeah.
Real quick, going back to I was going to credit Mark Schofield again because he made another great point with the way NFL offenses are going, which is what we've said about like how the Seahawks stop the Packers in a way defensively. Because Ridder's really good at alerting and throwing to that one-on-one if the defense gives it to them. And the way NFL offenses are is, hey, if you got a one-on-one, let's look at that heavy and then read out the concept on the backside, And Ridder showed that in college, and it translates right to the NFL, as Mark said. And you're talking about building an offense around his game. I think that's something. It's just. Yeah, I'm a bit more concerned about his arm than you are. But then, you only need enough arm, and he probably does have a bit more. And he's been working with Jordan Palmer, who I believe was the guy who helped Josh Allen out, amongst others, because it's his job, to improve his mechanics. And I did see Ridder improve his mechanics from 2020 to 2021. There was an improvement. So, that's a positive sign. He has a bit of a wind up, which also I think leads to balls dying a bit. Well, not dying, but getting there later than you'd expect. So anyway, but Ryan, to go back to that, we didn't really spend enough time on him because he's obviously I don't think he seems very disrespected. And you found a really interesting tweet about him in outdoor stadiums, because my worry with him is I've occasionally watched Atlanta, a red zone clip, or even in the preseason when I'm hungry for football and I'll stick Atlanta on, and there's times where he gets a bad offensive line and his arm, and Atlanta has had a bad offensive line for a while, and they struggled with some draft picks. I believe they probably improved it last year, but anyway, I digress. But there's times where his arm looks gone and he looks terrible because he is a pocket passer and he's going down. He's rushed in. It's just a mess. But that tweet you found about him actually being better in outdoor stadiums, because obviously I was concerned him playing in a dome in Atlanta and coming to cold, wet Seattle, and you saw what I'm sure it was just warm weather did for Tom Brady. Oh no, it would have been his diet as well. You saw what that did for him in that sense. But the inverse then of Ryan going to cold Seattle, I was a bit, concerned about that kind of idea. But then, I can't find the tweet, but
so it's his completion percentage outdoor for that year led the league at 68%,
and that was 2020, right?
2020. Now, I don't have the same stat for 2021. Now, granted, that's not when it's raining. That's not when it's sub 32 degrees. So I don't know. I don't know what the what those splits are, but I think that right there should quell things a little bit.
But this is all a moot point because and just real quick, he's a completely different level of quarterback to Baker is right now. So let's not even. This is so disrespectful to
Matt Ryan is still anywhere between the 8th and 11th best quarterback in the league, in my opinion.
Yeah, he's not top 15. He's top 12.
Yeah,
I think
his offensive. I mean, his
and that's different.
offensive supporting cast has not been good the last 2-3 years.
No, so
Like Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley have not been on the field together as much as maybe people think they have been.
But as I said, probably a moot point because the man who must not be named signed in Cleveland, and however upset Ryan is, and they should stoke that up because heck, he should be upset. Like for Verts, Charles McDonald, he pointed out that Ryan rescued the franchise really when they were in the midst of the Vic scandal, and now they're like getting onto like courting Watson while Ryan, their franchise legend, is still the quarterback, and Watson just, I mean, come on, like he should be upset, but he is. Everyone's tweeting about what a professional Matt Ryan is.
Yeah,
Nah, F that. Go and play for someone who wants you, and wanted you. But I don't know. It would be fun. And that is like I mean, it's not the perfect comparison, but it is like the modern day Hasselbeck back for Pete, right?
Except better. I mean, Matt Ryan is better now than Hasselbeck.
Yeah.
I mean, Ryan is better than Hasselbeck ever
Which
was,
is why
really,
it's not the perfect comparison.
Best, but I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
And his cap hits. Cap hits
are not absurd. It's $23.5 million for 2022 if you trade for Ryan. It is. That is if that restructure does not go through. If the restructure does go through and they were to trade him, it's only like $7.5 million for the team that trades for him, but that makes it really hard on the Falcons to get rid of him. So $23.5 million cap hit, I can stomach. I think that's worth it if so long as you don't have to give up anything higher than, let's say, pick 76 for him this year. Maybe you got to do 76 this year, like a 4th round pick next year, or even a 3rd round pick next year. I don't know.
I'd have, from like I was saying to Ty before we recorded, but like I'd have done it for a 2nd round pick before even the Watson stuff. Like if they were just like, hey, we just want to, we're weird with Atlanta, we don't have that good of a roster, we're just ready to fully rebuild here. I'd have done it for 2. So now he's upset.
Yeah,
you got future assets.
So, yeah, you do. Yeah. So
like if you're but like I think he could win easily. Well, not easily. I think he could win with the right pieces around him, and as we've said, and we can talk about that next time, we think the roster is better than a lot of people. I think he can win you can go 11-6 and be really feisty in the playoffs, especially if as I said, you have to have the right pieces around him.
A lot of things have to go right, but the defense,
and then when you're in, as we've seen, when you're in,
anything can happen.
Yeah. And we should also mention here, for anyone that's watching that may not know, and I'm sure a lot of people who are watching already know, that there have been reports that the Seahawks have called the Falcons about.
Yeah.
So there is something tangible here. It's not just us theorizing now. It's actually there has been some communication established between the two teams.
Agreed. Yeah. Another subplot to this is if you get a quarterback like Matt Ryan or Desmond Ridder, you can it's easier to evaluate Shane Waldron. It's easier to evaluate any offensive coordinator, because when you have Russ, I really think that there's only like one broad offense you can run. So if you've got Matt Ryan or Desmond Ridder, you can actually scheme things, and the quarterback's going to hold to the structure that they're trying to scheme up. So it's a little bit, you can do a larger variety of things. So we would kind of know what Seattle really has in Shane Waldron. Is he one of those new, young, exciting McVay, Shanny guys? So time will tell if they get another quarterback. I mean, I don't know. If they get Malik Willis, maybe again, there's a lot of differences between him and Russ, but there's some overlap. The offensive structure might look similar enough, and that there's a lot of deep shots, and then there's a lot of quick game, and maybe not so much in between. We won't know until it happens. It might be harder to tell what you have with in Shane Waldron with Malik Willis.
So Griff,
yeah.
Real quick, sorry to interrupt, but
no, you're good.
Let me ask you this: if you do say trade for Matt Ryan. Is taking Willis at 9 still on the table for you? Even though that you probably have quarterback short up for the next 2 seasons and the class is better next year?
I wouldn't put it past Schneider to do that. I think there's a lot of merit to trading for Matt Ryan and drafting a guy that you like still, because Matt Ryan, if he is still, say things go well and Matt Ryan is still like his arm hasn't fallen off and he becomes a free agent, you're not going to go pay Matt Ryan $40+ million a year. So yeah, draft him. But at the same time, if you trade for Matt Ryan and say you really like the draft next year, you can package picks and Ryan.
Yeah, this is where I'm at with it. Like people saying, hey, there's no point in winning games this season. Well, one, obviously that directly contradicts Pete Carroll's very, ethos. But two, you have the ammo. Even if you're good this year and you need a quarterback or like you're mid, you have enough to move up if you wanted to take your quarterback, if you really, really wanted to. And it's easy to look ahead to the next class and be like, that's kind of better. But I think the overall consensus is the quarterback class looks better next year. But I mean, we've spoke about 2 guys today who are exciting, if not the clear, QB1 of past years, and not obvious first round picks, even though they probably, they probably will go there, I imagine.
Yeah.
But yeah. Anyway,
if they trade for Baker, I think they absolutely will draft a quarterback this year. But if they trade for Ryan, I think there's a scenario where they don't.
I'd almost view it as a wasted draft. I think especially after Schneider's given that spiel about, hey, I haven't done a good enough job taking quarterbacks. Like, please, it's a waste. Like I've just been saying about how you need to develop a guy, and these guys in particular, they have something, but they might not be pro ready.
Yeah.
Please just take one. I don't care. Like, please, we're not in a situation where Ryan's going to play for years. Which is not going to happen anyway. But anyway.
Yeah.
So Baker, what are you comfortable trading for him? Because I know both of you aren't super excited about him, of course. So
I wouldn't trade anything higher than a 4th round pick at this point, because they have no leverage.
They have no leverage.
They can get a 5th round pick and a thank you very much. Like,
they're trying to get rid of him.
They've gotten Watson. They've also signed Jacoby Brissett. So now Baker Mayfield is like the 3rd guy there. So they've made their intentions very clear to the league. I think it's a really stupid way that they've gone about it, but it puts them at a
technically
really disadvantageous place. But
technically, you can have 3 quarterbacks, right? But yeah, I agree. It's just wild.
Baker won't suffer seeing his job stolen from him on the bench. That would be a distraction for the Browns. I mean, they already have a huge distraction.
I mean, he's already requested out. So
when is Watson getting suspended for a year?
The league is probably going to only suspend him for 4 to 6 weeks, because if they suspend him for longer than that, then they're admitting that they think it's horrible. And then if you admit that it's horrible, then you're saying, well, why are you letting him in the league? Why isn't it indefinite? Why aren't you waiting for the civil cases to be resolved? So if they say, they're basically saying, oh, we're turning a blind eye to it, is really what they're saying, which doesn't surprise me. But the more they suspend him, the more they're acknowledging that fans' outrage is valid, which it is valid. But so they're playing dumb is what they're doing. And Roger Goodell is very good at playing dumb. And that's why I think there's going to be a minimal suspension here. What's so dark about his contract extension is that his base salary for this, like, suspension only comes out of base salary, right? His
I know.
Salary for this year is $1 million. So
I saw that.
They made sure, like, hey, you're going to get all your money. That's just even more gross. I mean, it makes sense to do that to convince him to come, I guess, since that's what they basically lured him with, like a fully guaranteed contract. Man, the whole thing's so dark. Anyway, I don't think they'll suffer having Baker Mayfield on the bench. I think that would add even more distraction to them. And
oh no, there's no way. I don't even think they can make it work financially.
Yeah.
But
And the only thing that's probably going to drive up cost of acquisition at this point is Indy. Like it seems like Indy's been kind of aggressive in his market, but
Well, I don't know if Indy's been aggressive or if it's Baker
Baker
being
trying to
sure,
manufacture.
trying
yeah,
to
there's
go
that
to
too, right?
Indy.
If you're
But
Indy, though, you should trade for Matt Ryan. That'd be the best quarterback Reich has ever coached, even in Philly.
well, and you get this kind of there's like now a weird situation where I think both Indy and Seattle are probably trying to push for Ryan still, with the hope that you know they can get it done. But then obviously if they can't, and I don't think they will be able to, I don't think that's going to happen for either team. Then it is
Yeah.
to Baker, and also with you want your quarterback in fairly early, you kind of want that position resolved, but also, I mean, Cleveland's going to have to do something with him eventually. So, like we said, they have zero leverage, and so there's no real rush in getting him done, and no rush in giving an asset like make them cut him, like.
Mm.
And so while Cleveland will try and generate a bidding war between Indy and Seattle, both teams would not surely know that they can just wait that out a bit.
Yep.
So
yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I was just
Well,
gonna.
no, you first.
There's such a delay. It's because it's transatlantic.
Free agent quarterbacks that are still out there. Should we transition to that, or
Sure.
you have?
I don't know any.
Well, I mean, Cam Newton, Colin
I can
Kaepernick.
rattle them off the top if you want.
You mentioned both those guys earlier.
But how do they fit into the whole?
Well,
outlook?
Cam gets disrespected because everyone sees his amazing rushing ability from his prime, and no one credits him for his pocket passing, which
He's
is
one of the best of the last decade, man.
it's
like
nuts. But I don't. Yeah. Anyway,
he's not a scrambler in the sense that he scrambles after the progression is exhausted or if pressure is on him right away and he has to. But he's a statue pocket passer. Like that's who he is habitually. Just because he isn't a statue athletically doesn't mean that his process is different. And he's such a good runner. But the question with him, obviously, is we're not debating that. It's like, is he washed? Is his arm done? Is he too hurt? I still think he has enough of an arm to produce in the right team. The Patriots were awful offensively in 2020, and the Panthers are even worse in 2021. Absolutely horrid everywhere. I mean, they have DJ Moore. I think McCaffrey was out for a lot of the season, right? So like, you can't evaluate him. However good he is or isn't, he is better than his statistics would tell you the last 2 years. That's all I'm saying. And he probably doesn't have a huge cap hit. It's probably less than $5 million. So my thinking only is why not? He probably fits like a glove what they could do in Seattle. The only question is, would they try to have an expansive QB run game with him? I think he's getting old, man. I don't think you need to put any more tread on his tires there. Do it for fun. Do it for a goal line package. But like he can sling it to DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Noah Fant. That would be the best. That would be the best receiving core plus tight end that he's had his entire career. I don't think it gets talked about just enough how much the Panthers underinvested in Cam Newton.
True.
And it'd be fun to see Noah Fant with Cam.
Cam loves tight ends.
What he did with Greg and who was that other tight end the Panthers had?
I don't know.
Anyway, yeah, he likes tight ends, as you said.
And then with Colin Kaepernick, we know that Pete has said multiple times he deserves a second chance. What a marvelous opportunity it would be to sign Colin Kaepernick. There is nothing inhibiting him now or stopping them from doing that. If he doesn't even get a camp invite, then like I think it's fair to call BS on Pete's words there. Is he just blowing smoke? So I think they should give him a shot. He worked out with Tyler Lockett. His arm still looks like he has arm talent. He's been out of the league for 4 years.
Ty wrote an article on how Pete Carroll backed himself into a corner with the Kaepernick thing.
Yeah.
Well, I haven't written it yet, but I'm going to.
spoilers. Sorry.
Spoilers.
Me,
So hey,
the old CMS. Which
so as
is,
Pete likes to talk about opportunities, it's an awesome opportunity for Pete to make good on his word.
I mean,
Yeah.
what that was like, I was just like, why you don't do this? And it was so weird that when he started talking about Geno Smith, I thought he said Jalen Smith because obviously Jalen Smith got injured, and I thought Pete was just going to list off every single NFL player
quarterback that
who'd
ever happened.
had a second chance. I was just like, why are we bringing up Kaepernick like this? You're just backing yourself into a corner, like. But
I mean, he said it again. He's got he wants a second chance. Well, if you're talking about,
but
if you're
then he
professing your
quickly
love for second chances, sign him.
But then he quickly said about how it might not be in football. He was
Yeah,
just talking.
that's-
He had verbal
was-
diarrhea.
Yeah,
But,
Yeah.
He
Well,
was like
there
a
was
stream
also
of
a
consciousness.
weird part there that he was like, Tyler Lockett worked out with him. I don't know how that happened. And it was like,
well, Pete doesn't know how Twitter works, to be fair. Like, legit.
yeah. But
But,
also, don't you kind of wonder, because like Tyler Lockett's kind of the leader now on that offense.
Do you think the
isn't
front
he?
office sent him on a fact-finding mission?
Just be like, hey, like, see what's up with this guy.
He
Yeah.
definitely talked to his position coaches. Definitely talked
Yeah.
to Canales. Canales is a Pete guy.
Yeah.
He and Pete are aligned on quite a few things.
Yeah, maybe.
Wink, wink,
Like,
nudge,
he
nudge.
didn't need to say, I don't know how that happened. You're right. But then again, I tweeted,
No, he's just being Pete. He's a
Pete
weirdo.
Carroll, I was like, Pete Carroll's like he's first discovered coffee, whereas John Schneider looks like coffee's not working anymore.
Yeah.
By
Which
the way,
legit.
the tight end you were trying to think of from the Panthers, Ed Dixon, Seahawks legend.
Eddie. My bad.
Dude, did he actually produce?
I
guess
he
did. He had a
I'm
few
pretty
like
sure he did.
400,
Yeah, he had
500
a
yard
few
season.
like pretty solid years.
Yeah, like 500 yards for a tight end is actually like legitimately good.
He had one 400 yard season. Yeah.
Oh yeah, see, nailed it.
With Carolina, another 500 yard with Baltimore. But yeah,
Man, that offense was disgusting.
Yeah,
You
remember
just-
their number one receiver was Kelvin Benjamin.
it's embarrassing.
Who
Ted
was their
Ginn,
number
that
two?
2015 year.
Was it like
Ted Ginn.
Well, there was Funchess. There's Funchess.
Jericho Cotchery, Funches.
Jericho Cotchery,
They just drafted receivers who should have been tight ends. I don't. Yeah, that you're right, Griff. They didn't have receivers.
They had Brenton Burson, who just sounds like a fake.
So real
Very
quick,
fake name.
two other guys, because there's like a consensus for is Matt Corral from Ole Miss, who
Draft. Yeah.
there's a lot of rumors about because Monte Kiffin is on the Ole Miss staff under his son Lane Kiffin. Obviously, Monte Kiffin, Pete Carroll's defensive mentor. The only day Pete Carroll chose at the combine to go outside was when Matt Corral and the quarterbacks were running. Hey, turns out Seattle really needs a quarterback, so it's not really a big thing that he probably was watching all of them. And he took a photo of Monte Kiffin, which might have just been why he went outside anyway. We don't know. But apparently, Carroll obviously was introduced to Corral. That's a confusing tongue twister. And so, people put two and two together. I mean, he is scrappy, and he is the kind of guy that to me is more of a round 4, round 5, maybe round 3 guy than a first round guy. And so in that sense, if Seattle's going to wait it out, they want a scrappy guy who could become something. He has a really quick release. He throws over the middle. He goes through progressions well at times, and you can see him reading it out and having a good process to find the check down. That's exciting, and he has an arm which gets downfield. Problems are his deep accuracy was very inaccurate, especially on the sideline throws. Now, part of that was his receivers just couldn't win a red line, and then the other thing is I'm a bit concerned about like that offense is a tricky eval because there's so much RPO stuff and more actually play action pop passes, but it's similar things. The ball's out, it's one read. He's very accurate and the ball's out fast, but it's like, how do you translate that to the NFL? Yes, that's still a thing in the NFL, but it's not a bigger deal. And then the other thing is some of the stuff he does makes me think that I've just said he goes through you can see him go through progressions around certain stuff, but some of the things he does, I'm like, he's like just throwing this to the guy because he just wants to. He's not actually reading the curl flat defender, ain't giving him that, but the wheel's wide open, for instance, against cover 3. Like he's just forcing throws into coverage. And yeah, he had a bad pick on a goal line bootleg trying to lead a comeback against Auburn, I think it was, where he sees a receiver get open in the back of the end zone, but he tries to force it in there. Terrible situational play. And the backside corner comes across, undercuts it for the interception, kind of ends their comeback attempt. So, yeah, but there's stuff to work with. And, if we're thinking, but Griff made a point about how Russell coming out was like this kind of, he'd been in all these systems and he was much more there than, like, say, Willis, right? This is the thing, like Russell in round 3 is wild. I don't know how, hindsight is easy, but the fact he'd been in that Wisconsin deal after his experience in other systems is just so big. Like Corral is just it's a difficult projection, and it's a difficult system, and it's just so much more of a work in progress. So really, what I'm describing there is like a 5th round pick, right? But he might go round 2. That's how silly this all is.
Yeah.
And then Pickett has small hands, fumbles a lot, and wears a new pair of gloves every single game. So, and he did a fake slide, which got I don't know if it got a rule change or just a rule clarification, but that is evil. And I guess it's a good finishing point.
A real clout booster for Pickett.
Good finishing point though. That offense is evil, quarterbacks are evil. We hate them.
This was our big quarterback podcast, and we didn't actually talk about a specific quarterback till like the 55th minute. So the listeners have been troopers if they've made it this far.
Well, I mean, yeah. What do they expect?
Life is tricky. How can you expect anything, right? It's like a box of chocolates, even.
Expect the least, receive the most. Is that a thing? I don't think that's a thing.
Under promise, over deliver.
That's a thing.
Yeah.
Expect disappointment, and you won't be disappointed.
There you go.
Damn,
that's mind games.
With
we're all just coping on to the next day, right?
I think you have to if you wear a hood up and say something, it sounds more profound. I'd say Ty. Yeah, Ty's got it down. Oh yeah, definitely. Like maybe not like that actually. Anyway, thank you everyone for watching. That's on YouTube. Listening, we're on Spotify. We're on Spreaker. We might be on some other podcast things, maybe not. But we appreciate you. We're still getting good traction, so that's very nice to see. Lovely comments on the last one, and yeah, check out everyone else as well as me at Dane. Don't do it, Matthew. GNZLZ.
Matty, tell me, what are the vowels? What are the vowels in the English language, in the alphabet? What are the vowels?
All right, and then you can find Matty at Matty F Brown, and then you can find me at C Mike Spin Move on Twitter.
Yep.
We're on
He's so
different.
puzzled.
We're on different consonants.
Is it actually different in the UK?
No.
Yes, of course it is. Of course it is. Come on. Would I ever lie to you?
And